All right, everybody. Hello and welcome back to an LSU Alabama edition of the Advocates LSU Sports Update. I'm football beat writer Wilson Alexander, joined today by my colleague Leah Vann. It is LSU Alabama week, always a big time around here. Leah, this is kind of it's sort of both of our first ones at home. When I was covering the team in 2020, that was not a good game, and nobody was really able to be there anyway. But big week. What do you think about it so far?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I've been here for over a year now, and I still haven't seen like a Tiger Stadium in full force. I mean, you could count like Southern, you could count Tennessee maybe, but Tennessee was a morning game, so everybody's like saying just wait till you're like big first game under the lights at Tiger Stadium that's like, against an SEC opponent. And I think this is that time. So I'm really excited, and I will be leaving my house very early to beat traffic.
Very smart idea right there. Yeah, it's a big game. Obviously, this is all of a sudden now a top 10 game, which seems a little bit peculiar that LSU was ranked number 10 in the college football playoff rankings that came out last night. But that's where they are, and Alabama's number 6. And, it's big implications, even here early in the Brian Kelly era, earlier than you might have expected to be at this time. If LSU wins, it's in the driver's seat in the SEC West. And so we're going to dive into that matchup. If LSU can really what it has to do to win this game, how feasible some of those things may be. We want to hear your questions. So if you have any, please drop them in the comments section, and we'll get to those as we go and kind of near the end as well. So please ask whatever you have, fire away. I want to start with an update from Brian Kelly this morning on left guard Garrett Dellinger. Garrett is still day-to-day, but he could return on Saturday. If he does play, it'll be in a rotation, probably there at left guard. Miles Frazier has been the starting left guard the last 2 games with Garrett out. Garrett's one of their best linemen, though, and even if he only plays 20 to 25 snaps like Brian Kelly said he probably would if he were even to play, that's a boost for the offensive line. Leah, what do you make of how that rotation would go and what it means for LSU against this Alabama front?
Yeah, I think it obviously adds some depth that LSU could use in a game that could be quite exhausting on the front. You look at the playmakers, everybody already knows about Will Anderson, who some say probably should have won the Heisman last year, but he's still on track this season to have a really productive season. He has 6 sacks so far, and 12 tackles for loss. And then last season he had 17.5 sacks or 17.5 and 34.5 tackles for loss. So obviously he's going to be a huge threat to this offense. And Jaden is pretty decent under pressure, but I don't know if he's going to be able to get away with the runs that he's been getting away with against, say, an Ole Miss. And so, having Garrett in at that guard position could add some stability, could give some guys some rest time when it comes to that. And obviously, like, if Jaden has enough time to make the passes that he's been making the past 2 weeks, I think that the offense could be equally as productive. But it's definitely going to be a little bit jarring.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see exactly what LSU ends up doing, because as good as Garrett is, it's like he's got to be able to handle the workload on that MCL injury. It was just a couple of weeks ago that happened against Tennessee. And like you said, Alabama, even though this isn't necessarily the Alabama defenses of old that allows like 6 points a game or something like that, it's still an effective group. And let's start looking at that here, I guess. Alabama has allowed, like we said, Alabama looks like vulnerable and shaky this year when you kind of use your eyes. Look at the numbers, and maybe it's not quite as vulnerable as you might think, I guess. Alabama's defense is allowing 16.6 points per game. It's only given up 15 touchdowns, and 7 of those were against Tennessee, which obviously has one of the best offenses in the country this season. And the way that Tennessee operates on offense is quite unlike LSU, I guess. So does LSU need to do, when you look at just to schematically evaluate this, if you could, I guess, a little bit, and in terms of what Alabama has faced before, does LSU really match up well in this game?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think they do, because I think, like you said, Alabama's defense is not as strong as it has been. And somebody that I talked to today was saying that this year Alabama has been kind of uncharacteristically giving up big explosive plays. I think we saw a lot of that against Tennessee. Obviously, again, like different offense, but with LSU running a mix of that tempo versus non-tempo offense that Brian Kelly says is really like the sweet spot. I think that, that could pave some room for this offense to really do well in the passing game. I think where they're going to struggle is the run game. LSU has had a pretty good running back in Josh Williams, who is also just as talented as a pass blocker, if not more talented as a pass blocker, and might be used more in that sense. But you do return John Emery to kind of add some versatility to this offense. But I think it's going to be tough to run the ball. I think they actually might have a lot more luck in the passing game since Jaden has been kind of hitting his targets, and that secondary seems to be kind of giving up some big plays this year. I was trying to figure out if I could find the stat book from Tennessee, but I wanted to give it like the 20 or more yard plays, but I'm still looking. What are you thinking?
Yeah, well, while you kind of search for that, it's interesting because Tennessee schematically is very different from what LSU said, kind of like we were alluding to a minute ago. Like they spread LSU saw it firsthand. Obviously, LSU fans know kind of what we're talking about, that Tennessee was spread out so far to the boundary. It stretched Alabama really thin. Alabama ended up having to kind of drop Will Anderson and Dallas Turner into coverage, which is something it doesn't really want to do. Like Tennessee very much dictated how Alabama had to play defenses because it had to adjust in that game and sort of got it out of its comfort zone. LSU, like you said, they can use some tempo because they've been effective the last 2 weeks on offense. They've been able to mix that up and sometimes go fast after picking up a first down and then slow it down also as well, which is really, like you said, where Brian Kelly wants to be. They're not going to be like a high up-tempo offense like Tennessee is. But that's the thing that, got Alabama off balance was that kind of scheme. LSU's not going to run that. And LSU is going to have to just do what it does really effectively, I guess, because it's not going to have those receivers spread all the way out to the boundary, and it's not going to just constantly go up tempo. And it makes me sort of think about how LSU has scored recently has been these really long sustained drives in the Florida and in the Ole Miss game. I mean, 75 yards, 80 yards, 88 yards, 73 yards, just over and over and over. It's typically been a really long drive, which is great to see from an offense that you can do that, but it's going to be hard against Alabama to sustain on offense over and over and over again. I feel like defensively, LSU is going to have to make some plays, get a turnover here and there, because that's also sort of what has pushed Alabama, like in the Texas A&M game, which was so weird because Alabama was starting Jalen Milroe. It's back at quarterback. It had 4 turnovers. That's really the only reason that game kind of came down to the end like it did anyway. But I feel like field position is going to be pretty key there for LSU to try to give the offense just a better chance of moving the ball consistently, because it's going to be harder against Alabama than it was against Ole Miss and Florida to rip off these 75-yard drives just over and over and over again. Have you pulled up those explosive play stats yet?
Yeah, I can't find them. I was like, dang, I need to, because usually you can go to stat broadcast, pull up like the live stats, and there's a big plays tab, but I can't find it. But I will find it and I'll tweet it out later. But yeah, I think that Alabama, I think with LSU, I'm drawing a blank here. Wow. So like you said, it was the tempo that kind of threw it off, but also made it more of a shootout. With LSU, if they can hold on to the ball as long as possible and just, drain the clock and give Alabama as few opportunities as it can. I mean, I know that sounds pretty like elementary, but I think that's how you maybe gain control. I mean, the Tennessee game could have gone either way. We saw that. But yeah, I think with Alabama, you don't want to give them favorable field position with your special teams errors. You don't want to turn over the ball. That's going to be super huge, because if you give that team any extra possessions, like, it's over. I think the other thing that LSU needs to do is start off fast on defense. You cannot give up like an opening touchdown, cannot give up an opening field goal. Really, you've got to find a way to kind of put pressure on Bryce Young. And I was reading through actually Pro Football Focus, and Bryce Young's completion percentage goes down to 58% when he's being blitzed. So, and obviously he's a really good passer and he is pretty elusive, but if you can contain him to the pocket and you get him to kind of panic, you eliminate that first read, then you can probably contain him. And we saw that when they played Texas. Like, Texas was able to kind of eliminate Bryce Young there until like the fourth quarter. So That's what I'm seeing. And then if you look at Daniels, he's a little bit more of a runner in comparison to Bryce Young, and does a little bit better on the run. Actually, his completion percentage actually stays steady or goes up when he's faced with a blitz. He throws for 71%. So I thought that was a pretty interesting stat. I know I kind of just went all over the place, but how do you think that LSU can handle Bryce Young?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring those stats up, because like the eye test would suggest something sort of different, because there's been this kind of a conversation around Jaden Daniels all season about how, he takes off when he's under pressure. And maybe that's part of the reason that his completion percentage is kind of high, or maybe he's just identifying those hot reads, doing a good job of that and getting the ball out fast. It's interesting that it comes up that way, because Bryce Young, the conversation around him and the thing that makes him one of the many things anyway, that makes him so good is his ability to extend plays. Brian Kelly talked about today on the SEC coaches teleconference that whereas Jaden has gotten better at this, but he's still sort of in the camp of running and then, picking up plays with his legs, whereas Bryce Young is sort of scrambling and rolling out and then, still finding things downfield with his arm. But he's the reigning Heisman Trophy winner for a reason. As good as Hendon Hooker has been, and even Hendon Hooker might win the Heisman Trophy this year, I don't think it's like necessarily a hot take to say that Bryce Young is probably the best quarterback that LSU will play this season. He's one of the best in the country. He does so many things well. I mean, because you look at it without him, what that Alabama offense turned into. They lost him with I think it was a shoulder injury in the Arkansas game. And, they ended up winning that game and winning it fine, but Jalen Milroe wasn't, fantastic. And then a week later against Texas A&M, with a week to prepare for Milroe, he turns the ball over 4 times in his first start. And that game comes down right to the wire on the goal line with a chance for Texas A&M to win. And so when Bryce Young, though, it's just so much different, that offense, because they don't have the dynamic receivers on the outside that they've had in years past. They don't have Devontae Smith or Amari Cooper or John Mechie or Jameson Williams, the kind of thing. And so he's doing a lot to lift them up. Their leading receiver, it's hard to even name who they've got on the outside for a lot of people, because there's nobody that impressive really, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I feel like LSU's corners have been maybe struggling at times this year, but probably the matchup really comes down to how I guess they can contain Jahmyr Gibbs, which I know you're sort of looking at a little bit today. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so Jahmyr Gibbs, last time I checked, actually was leading the team in number of receptions, not like reception yards, but yeah, he seems to be kind of a huge part of the passing game too. So, when it comes to him, he's such a dynamic running back when it comes to being a receiver and also being able to run the ball really well, and he's very experienced. He's probably the strength of this offense other than Bryce Young. And so, it'll be interesting. LSU, what I'm working on today is a story about how LSU can use Harold Perkins and BJ Ojulari on the field at the same time, because a lot of what we've been hearing from Brian Kelly is like, well, if we put Perkins on the field, then we have to take Ojulari out, and we don't really want to take Ojulari out. Well, last week, if we saw, I think it was in the fourth quarter, they ran a couple of defensive stunts with both of them in there. They've used Harold Perkins as a spy. So I think that, and those were a lot of like third down situations and like fourth down conversion situations when Ole Miss decided to go for it. And they were extremely effective in not only eliminating the passing game, but also kind of helping out and eliminating the run game too, which was, again, Ole Miss's huge strength, right? With 2 strong running backs. So I think that if LSU is able to get both of those guys on the field as much as possible, and Brian Kelly said today that they are both incorporated into that base defense too. So not just running not just in nickel, not just in dime, in everything. I think that they could put a lot of pressure on the outside where Jahmyr Gibbs is going to probably be as a target. And I think that's going to be probably the key to this game, is getting Harold Perkins and BJ Ojulari on the field at the same time.
Yeah, which will really be fascinating to see exactly how they do that, because LSU, we've gone over this a few different times in writing and, on this little show is that Harold Perkins has been, moved to outside linebacker, and that LSU is not wanting to move him back inside. And so Brian Kelly said there was a lot of considerations they had to make because of that, where, okay, do we take BJ Ojulari off the field, or do we go out of nickel in order to have him? But because Alabama doesn't have those, just like a dynamic, litany of excellent receivers. Not that they're bad, but they're just not like going to take the top off the defense, and you don't have to shade a safety over top of one of them just to account for them. You can kind of probably you don't have to worry as much about, I think, what they have at wide receiver. A quick aside, yeah, Jahmyr Gibbs leads the team with 31 receptions. The next closest is Kobe Prentice with 28. No Alabama receiver has more than 376 yards this season. They haven't been the same group that they were in the past. And so it'll be really interesting to see what LSU does, because they maybe don't have to play nickel. Maybe they don't have to do those sort of things in the secondary to account for all these receivers like they did against Tennessee. Then maybe this really sets up well for Harold Perkins and BJ Ojulari to be on the field at the same time, because like Brian Kelly said earlier this week, and kind of like you mentioned, they've got to be on the field together. Brian Kelly said how they got to get their best players on the field, and those are two of the best. Even if Harold is going to maybe struggle with fitting the run at times, or making some certain reads, especially they don't want him inside, because that's still kind of a little much for him at this point in his career. He's so fast and athletic that maybe once Bryce Young is rolling out and trying to make something happen, Harold is the guy who could chase him down. So is BJ. So that'll be interesting to see. Is there any other sort of little things in this matchup that you've come across that you wanted to touch on, or I don't know, just any other general thoughts on the game?
Yeah, I'm just really interested. I think back to last year when we were in Tuscaloosa and the press box kind of looked at each other at halftime like, is LSU going to really pull this off? Because they had really played some aggressive defense. And I feel like, and my inkling is that Bryce Young does tend to struggle when he is put under pressure, and he can't scramble as much as he normally does. And so I'm wondering how effective LSU's front will be against Bryce Young. I wonder how these linebackers are going to operate. I mean, we didn't even talk about Micah Baskerville, but he's also been incredibly effective at not just in the run game and those run fits, but also has been another guy who can just come up the middle and sack the quarterback. And, I think that Bryce Young is going to struggle with LSU's defensive front almost as much as LSU might struggle with Bama's defensive front. Of course, you've got Will Anderson, who's kind of like the star. So I don't know. I'm wondering, is it going to be a shootout, or is it going to be really low scoring? So that's kind of my curiosity. What are your takes?
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I mean, I think we should pause for just a second to say, if anybody has questions about the game, about anything else with this team, send them our way. Go to the comment section and drop those. We have one that that got sent in late for our show last week that we'll get to here in a second. I'm not quite. I don't know. I mean, we'll see exactly what happens. My feeling is that if it does turn into a shootout, obviously that's good for LSU, just to be in the game. I feel like Alabama is still. I mean, they're a 13-point favorite on the road, and even though LSU has played well here recently and made this game interesting, it still feels like Alabama is just a class above right now. I mean, I don't think that's a surprise necessarily, because Nick Saban's been doing this for so long. This roster is built up in a way that Brian Kelly is still trying to get this roster to that sort of place. He said himself this week that they're not there yet, and they've got some good players. They've done some good things. Jaden Daniels has obviously taken a huge step, and if he continues to play well, then he gives LSU a chance in this game. I think a lot of things hinge on him and his ability to play like he did the last 2 weeks against a much better defense. Because if LSU can take advantage of what it has at wide receiver and score and sort of force Alabama to not be able to just pin its ears back on the edges with Will Anderson and Dallas Turner, and kind of force them out of what they like to do in terms of rushing the passer, then LSU's got a good chance, especially at home. Night game in Tiger Stadium, that helps. Like we said, Alabama is one of the most heavily penalized teams in the country. I don't know if we've mentioned that necessarily so far today. I mean, they're
actually going to bring that up. Yeah, they actually are averaging 8.62 penalties per game, which is 125th fewest in FBS. So that would mean, I guess, they're like the 5th or 6th most. So yeah, they are one of the most penalized teams in FBS football right now.
Yeah, and especially in those games against Texas and Tennessee, which are both on the road. Against Texas, they were penalized 15 times for 100 yards. Against Tennessee, they were penalized 17 times for 130 yards. That was actually, it factored into the game, certainly, giving up all that yardage. And if Alabama continues to struggle with a road atmosphere, Tiger Stadium, even though it might be a little bit rainy, never actually rains in Tiger Stadium. Chance of rain is never, as we know. And so it could end up really swinging things in LSU's favor if Alabama continues to struggle with penalties. So we'll see. We got a question from last week that I wanted to pull up. Like I said, this comes from Cody. Do you see Kyron Lacy getting a bigger role with the passing game from here on out? This is an interesting little question, I think, because Kyron isn't necessarily. Oh, we appear to have lost Leah. Isn't going to be one of the top 3 guys in the wide receiver rotation for LSU. He's still one of the kind of that 5th or 6th option in the passing game, but he is certainly asserted himself as a more of an option these last couple of weeks. He's got at least 2 catches in the last 3 games. He had 4 against Tennessee. Oh, there she is again. And he had a couple of key catches late against Ole Miss. He was actually getting some more significant snaps, not just sort of playing in the end of games when LSU was putting in its sort of second team wide receivers. They were actually mixing him into the mix. And so he's not going to be one of their top 4 targets getters really, but he'll be, on the field at different times. And, there was 2 passes in particular that come to mind with him last week or 2 weeks ago against Ole Miss. There was a couple of quick hitch routes kind of in the second half as LSU was on a touchdown drive, as LSU was moving down the field that Jaden Daniels went to him right away. And it was sort of, he was on the receiving end of an example of Jaden throwing with a lot better anticipation. Leah, I know you missed some of that as you cut out. Did you have anything else to add about Kyron Lacy?
Yeah, I don't know. My internet quit on me or something. No, I think I agree with what you say. You also have to look to see your wide receivers as blockers too sometimes in the pass game and in the run game. And I looked up his pass blocking, his run blocking grades, and they're pretty good. So maybe he's in there a lot of times when you don't even realize it. And but yeah, as far as being like the guy with like the flashy numbers, no, but he also could be that unexpected target that Alabama is not expecting. So he could be somebody that you throw to on 3rd down every once in a while, and all of a sudden he's out of nowhere. So LSU has so many options at wide receiver. It's hard to key in on one. I think what's going to be interesting is who steps up. Is it going to be a Kayshawn game? Is it going to be a Malik Neighbors game? Is it going to be a Jure Jenkins game? They're all just kind of so dynamic in that sense. So I'm excited to see what happens.
Well, we'll have coverage of all of it after the game. In the week leading up to the game, we've got a lot still coming for you guys over the next few days leading up into that Alabama game, and then all the coverage post-game over on theadvocate.com and NOLA.com. We're here every Wednesday talking about the game on all the Advocates pages, usually at 2 p.m. Try to always hit that. Sometimes we have to move it around, but it's usually 2 p.m. here, talking about the game. And then we're also got the newsletter you can sign up for, LSU headlines and news in your inbox, email inbox every morning. And then, of course, just all the everything else we offer over at theadvocate.com and NOLA.com. So please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, everybody. Like I said, 6 p.m. Central Time kickoff on ESPN in Tiger Stadium Saturday night. It's prime time in Death Valley, and we'll have you covered on all of it. So thanks for watching. Be sure to tune in next week. For Leah Vann and everybody else over at The Advocate, I'm Wilson Alexander. We'll see you after the game and next week as well.